Welcome to another edition of the Mediatwits. It's number 157. I'm Mark Glaser, Executive Editor of PBS MediaShift. Today we'll be talking about the new Apple Watch, Apple's first move into the wearables category. Can it really revolutionize and make the watch something we need versus something we just want and something we desire? We'll be talking about that. We'll also be talking about how you're going to get news on the watch. Will glance journalism or one-sentence journalism really be the way we'll be using a watch in the future to get news and to get alerts? Before we get into our discussion, a word from our sponsor. Running your own business requires focus, and so does parenting. Mediatwits podcast sponsor NextSpace created a place where parents can give their best quality of attention to both co-working space and childcare space under one roof. Learn more at nextspace.us/nextkids. Also, PBS MediaShift has just launched a new series of online trainings called Digital Ed in partnership with top journalism schools. We have one-hour courses covering everything from iPhone audio reporting to starting your own venture. Real-world media training for the digital age. Sign up at digitaledcourse.com. Before we get into our discussion, I want to introduce our panel. We have Andrew Lih joining us from American University, Cindy Jeffers, CEO of Salon, Jefferson Yen, our producer in LA, Julia Beizer, head of mobile at Washington Post, Ricardo Bilton, reporter at Digiday. Let's start with you, Julia, first. The Apple Watch is literally launching today. A lot of different news organizations are trying to figure out exactly what to develop for it. Tell us about what your thinking was with the Washington Post app on the watch.
Well, thanks. Well, it was a really exciting opportunity for us. Here at the Washington Post for the last couple of years, we have been developing under something we like to call the theory of adaptive journalism. That is, how can we adapt the stories we're telling, how we're telling them to the platform a user is on. The watch gave us an opportunity to really rethink storytelling for the smallest of screens. So our product idea focuses on visual storytelling. We thought, how can we take one story of the day and turn it into essentially a storyboard, text and images, telling a story in just 6 screens of the watch that you can scroll up and down. So while we are also offering our readers on the watch a feed of headlines so they can just catch up on sort of the top stories of the day, we wanted to blow out one story each day with this visual treatment to see if some sort of new visual storytelling could catch on with these new users.
Yeah, and I know the New York Times is trying this kind of one-sentence approach, but it sounds like you're doing something different with this kind of big story, small screen, where I guess you kind of swipe through a lot of visuals to get the story. Is that how it works?
Yeah, that's correct. So if readers who come to our watch and tap on that app, the first thing they'll see at the top of the screen is a picture with a headline showing off the big story, small screen of the day. Tap into that and you'll see essentially, like I said, a storyboard laying out kind of the key facts of a story and pictures telling the story. So one of the early ones we mocked up was of the plane crash in the Alps, and so sort of pictures of the crash site, information about the doctor's notes, just 6 screens of kind of the latest updates on that story. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words. This is an opportunity for us in a small space to use those pictures as powerful storytelling techniques. Do we think that this will sort of revolutionize storytelling for the small screen? You know, maybe, maybe not. Our interest is really just experimenting with something new and seeing if it catches on with readers.
And Cindy, tell us about what you're doing at Salon. It's different because you're a little bit more thoughtful, more opinionated. How do you develop something for such a small screen?
Well, wearables are really, there's such a different, they provide such a different interaction between humans and technology than really anything else. There's a constant stream of data. Users currently check their mobile phones hundreds of times a day, some of them, and the watch just provides even more possibilities for interacting with them. The types of interactions are really different. While it may be more frequent, they'll be digesting things in much smaller chunks in a more discrete fashion. So it really changes the way that users interact with our content, and we are, adjusting across the board, from editorial to tech to sales and how we're approaching the product. So it really, from our perspective, it really requires rethinking how you maintain that high-quality news experience, news and analysis experience in this smaller, more discrete but kind of high-frequency platform. And for us, and I think a lot of other people, the headline has become more critical than ever. As things moved from print to digital, especially with SEO and social, headlines, became very important, but with this new platform, they become even more important to grabbing people's attention. When in the glance feature, for example, our notifications will be bundled with a lot of other notifications. So figuring out how to differentiate really comes down to what goes into that glance alone. So the headline is something that we've really thought through a lot. Our headlines generally have become more like summaries in the last year, and we think about them more and more as our primary platform has become mobile, and with the advent of with this impending watch launch, thinking about the watch also as our primary platforms, and kind of building the product backwards from there.
What about being like a non-native app, building non-native apps? Because it seems like there's a little bit of a disadvantage when you don't have kind of Apple's, you're in kind of their purview, you're stuck with kind of an app that is kind of slower moving, doesn't react as fast, right?
Do you mind explaining that question a little bit more? I'm trying what.
Oh, just because I think the apps that Apple has developed for it, from what I've heard from a lot of reviews, that theirs react a lot quicker than the ones that are kind of third party, that haven't kind of worked closely with Apple to develop them.
We did work closely with Apple on the watch app, so from everything I can tell, the watches. Our watch app is moving smoothly. I haven't seen others yet. I'm supposed to get the watch tomorrow, so we'll see.
Like everyone else.
Yeah, but I think in terms of thinking through that high quality news and analysis experience, the headline has been really important. How we customize and provide customization of the glance and the notifications has been really important. Personalization has become even more important, I think, with this platform, because the flow of data is so constant, allowing people to really get, fine-tune how they're interacting with your content is really important. And then I think another important piece of this is the interplay between the watch and the iPhone app. So our app, along with I think lots of others, the story stream appears on in our app, but it allows you to click over to the phone to read there. And I think for the first time, what we're seeing kind of at a very on a large mainstream level is this interplay between devices, so kind of like these companion devices. And I think we're going to see this more and more on other platforms, and so I think it's an important testbed to start to develop experiences with that interplay in mind.
Yeah. And Ricardo, tell us about, you've been looking at what a lot of publishers have been doing here, and I know Julia was mentioning, experimentation. This is really like trying something out and seeing what flies. So, because people don't really know how people will use the watch. I mean, is this just really just an early experimental phase, that will be followed by more practical, like how can we make this into something that's a business?
Yeah, I think what you're seeing is, especially with the early efforts here, publishers are basically doing what they know really well, can do really well, and bringing that to the watch. So that's notifications, that's story summaries, and things along those lines, which makes sense, right? That's what publishers, that's what they know, and so that's the first thing they're gonna bring to this new form factor. What I'm looking forward to are sort of like the second level, sort of the second 2.0 version of these apps. So I think one that's been really interesting, that's going beyond sort of the notification model, is what Epicurious, the cooking site, is doing with their app, which is basically they're making it into they made a kitchen timer, which is very different, but it's on brand for them, but isn't just you find the recipes on the Epicurious app and then push those to your watch, and then you'll be cooking, and then it will give you haptic feedback when there are certain we need to take something out of the oven or something along those lines. So that's what I'm really looking forward to. I think the things that are launching are pretty straightforward and pretty conventional, but it's a new form factor, so that's to be expected. I think with the second version of a lot of these things, I think you'll really see some of the potential unlocked, and also as Apple unlocks, opens it up for more third-party developers to do more, more location stuff, more, looking at heartbeat. Like that's not open to third parties yet. So I think we'll get there. I think it's still very early, but I'm excited for what people end up figuring out.
Yeah. Andrew, I mean, it's true that, with version 1, we always want to kind of avoid the iPhone 1, the iPad 1, and wait to see what happens next. I mean, is that really the same case when it comes to news and information coming on the watch? Should we really look out for this kind of second wave?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're definitely going to look back on this in 10 years and say, look at how thick and clunky that thing was, but the first wave of folks who used it were able to get a glimpse into how this thing is going to change how we interact with so many things. So, I was just recently on travel, and I was already thinking of all the scenarios in which the watch could really provide a companion for travel applications, right? So something that Apple has been a little bit behind on relative to Google is Google Now and its ability to send up cards and notifications and things that are in sync with your lifestyle, whether it's maps, notifications, there's delays going here, here's your plane ticket. And what Apple now has with 2-point-something million people ordering this watch overnight are that many more folks who can test these applications. And I think in terms of travel and business travelers, this is not just a cute little gadget. It actually could be quite interesting as something on your wrist that while you're fumbling for stuff and trying to get through security and everything, you've got all your crucial information there, including ways to pay and to change plans and to figure out what to do next.
And I mean, people have complained that this is really just an accessory to an iPhone, because most of the things that happen on the watch, you end up having to go back to your phone. I mean, is this really just kind of a step towards basically what will be a lot more interesting when it's just a standalone watch?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're really limited by battery technology at this point, right? That the smaller you can get it, the smaller the space is for battery. And right now, you still need a lot of space for a processor and screen. And until we really have a giant leap in how to power this thing, you're still going to be struggling for 20 hours of usable time out of these types of devices until we have ubiquitous inductive charging built into your desk. So even if you're sitting there at your desk, it's kind of charging through some kind of inductive current going through your desk. But that's kind of like how we're going to be stuck with this watch, is that we're going to have so many cool capabilities, but dang, if we can't get this thing working for more than 24 hours at a time, that's a real limitation.
Yeah, and another thing is the notifications. Julia, how are you dealing with that? Because I know this thing is literally tapping at your wrist, and every time you get, a new tweet, a new, breaking news alert, I mean, you have to be, I guess, somewhat sensitive to that when you're building an app, because you don't want to overdo it for people, right?
Absolutely. There is certainly a cadence issue that we're very, very cognizant of as we go into the watch era. Um, I think Cindy mentioned earlier, and I think it's so true, personalization, because this device is so personal, is going to be critical to all of our notification strategies going forward. It's something we certainly intend to experiment with as we move forward. Right now, we are looking at, continuing our blast notifications like we do on the phone, but we are very cognizant editorially about real national relevance for people about the alerts we send out to make sure that we are able to reach the broadest segment of our audience with something that's relevant to them.
Right. So you really want to personalize exactly what people can kind of, if they want alerts around, sports versus they want it around, the kind of hard news, you'll make it a little bit more personalized that way.
Absolutely, and there's sort of a personalization is in a really fun space, I think, for news right now, and there's this sort of very active personalization where a reader opts into certain segments they're interested in, and then there's sort of an inductive, passive personalization. We're very actively experimenting with both to see if we can come up with the best kind of formula for our alerting strategy. One thing about alerts, the sort of mass broadcast alert notifications, is that it helps with that serendipity, things you didn't know you knew. And as we move off, visiting the specific devices or apps or products or brands that we're familiar with, and move towards more of a notification screen or a notification, kind of platform like the watch, we have to be a lot better as a news organization at trying to hook these people.
Yeah, I can imagine. Cindy, what about you? I mean, what's your kind of notification strategy that you can kind of help alert people, but then not bug them? I mean, how are you going to try to do that with the Salon app?
We are starting with a more conservative approach in terms of the frequency with which we're reaching out to people through notifications, but we are working on really refining the ability to customize those notifications to the very specific types of content that users want to interact with, but also balancing that with some of that discoverability element that actually is kind of, despite the ability to customize, users are often more interested in some of the discovery that they find just through roaming through the site. So balancing those two, I think, is an ongoing experiment, and we're going to learn a lot in the next month.
I can imagine. So, Ricardo, what's your thought on, Apple is really positioning this as kind of a luxury item. I mean, there's a gold one that's $10,000 plus. Basically, if you're not Beyonce, you're not wearing it regularly right now. I mean, is this another one of these things where, is it a luxury item now, and how will that convert to the masses? I mean, what will make people, I guess, what's the line to get people to really need it versus want it?
Need it, I guess. The answer to that will come when there's a killer app for it. I think no pun intended. The challenge that Apple had when they have talked about it is that it's similar to with the iPad, is that they had this thing, they had this form factor, and they themselves weren't quite sure what it was for, which is very powerful. It's a very good position to be in because it's sort of generative in the sense that you let the early users help you figure it out. So I think that's it was a messaging issue from a marketing perspective. I think that's potentially where the really expensive, Apple Edition comes in. It's a great marketing tool in terms of, this thing exists. For the average person, for any of our parents, I don't really see the killer app yet. The thing that's going to say I need that. But that didn't happen for the iPad for a while either. So I think it will get there, but I think the early adopters will drive the initial interest in Apple. I think the projections are like 20 million units or something this year. But then it's going to become, these people will say, I had this for 6 months and it's actually been really useful, right? And then I think the real endorsements, the real marketing is going to come from those people who are walking around with this thing every day, and then I think we'll see it emerge what the real use cases are. But it's still early, so I don't know. It's hard to really say right now.
Yeah, and it seems like maybe it's going to be more in health than it is in news. If this thing is kind of monitoring everything, like the heartbeat and like all these other things, I mean, maybe it's more of a health tracker than it is necessarily going to be in news or alerts.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. Health, anything with ambient location awareness. I mean, the possibilities are definitely there in terms of it's a new form factor. It's very personal. I mean, that's what people have been saying. There's opportunities for a more personalized experience with this thing, and I think news is just one use case. I mean, if you look at the apps that Apple is now showcasing on the Watch store, it's Twitter, it's Yelp, it's Instagram, and New York Times is just one of a handful of the early things they're showcasing. So,
yeah, for sure. Andrew, what do you think? Oh, go ahead, jump in, Cindy.
I was just going to say, I think that success on the watch is going to be defined by the app's ability to really integrate with people's daily lives or their hourly lives. And I think the other thing that's going to be really important is that ability to play well with other devices, to be really useful to create experiences between devices. So getting back to this idea of the interplay between not just the iPhone, but I think other things, like I think VR, the ability to kind of extend the experience of VR, for example, to the watch, create another kind of feedback interface. It could create really interesting experiences.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, you can use it to like pay for things, and you can use it, to I don't know, open your garage door and whatever else it'll be used to do. I mean, that seems like the more interesting interactions. Andrew, tell us, what do you think as far as what could be the tipping point, what you think might be the killer app, and I'm also curious what you think about how the interactions of it works with in our culture. There's so much distraction. I mean, is there a potential of this to be even more distracting?
Oh yeah, there definitely is a potential to be more distracting. I mean, just think about when you're driving. There's going to be a whole new phenomenon of what is proper etiquette for this thing when you're driving, or not looking at it when you're driving. But I think what Cindy mentioned is really interesting. Remember the original iPod? You really couldn't do much with the iPod other than tether it to something and get things onto it, and only work with Apple. But eventually that morphed into something that worked with Windows. It stood alone on its own. It had its own Wi-Fi, and so you might see that same evolution with the watch. Would be pretty cool, that it actually doesn't need to be tethered to an iPhone. It has its own life and its own ecosystem on its own. Then I think something that's really interesting to figure out is whether it has a Google Glass type stigma to it, right? That one of the cool things is that it actually has Siri capability in it, right? So you can press down on the crown and speak into it. But that looks really dorky. I mean, that looks like something really kind of geeky from sci-fi. So is that a thing that people will do in public without feeling ashamed, or is that something that will just be natural in a few years? And it'll be interesting to see socially how that gets accepted in terms of interacting with your watch. Like, are these folks just going to be Google Glass outliers, or how quickly is it going to get absorbed into the mainstream culture that, oh yeah, you're barking into your wrist, that's okay, we kind of understand what that is.
Exactly, like when people are using just hands-free phones and just talking to themselves walking down the street.
Right.
Julia, do you have any thoughts about that? Like the kind of the cultural, kind of geekiness of it all, and kind of accepting this as a new kind of form of interaction, and will we be even more annoying when we eat with people and we're looking at our wrists now?
I do. I actually have a couple thoughts on that. One of the things that was most interesting to me about the early reviews is they were all very glowing about how beautiful the device was, and how natural it felt, but there was a very interesting undercurrent in them that the human beings who had been reviewing them from sort of mainstream publications were saying, I'm not quite sure how I feel about this. Not quite sure how I feel about getting this feedback on my wrist all the time. I'm not quite sure how I feel about it buzzing or doing whatever it is it does. And so I think that that's going to be a very interesting evolution, like what Andrew was saying, to see how as sort of first wave of adopters. Obviously, there were early adopters with, the Galaxy Gear and with the Android Wear, but sort of this additional wave of Apple Watch users comes into the play. How do people start reacting to this? I have a good friend here at the Post who was one of the first people to get a Pebble, and he would often say that he felt less rude in meetings because he wasn't checking his phone, he was checking his watch. Now, sitting on the other side of the table, I may not have felt that way because it looked like he was always trying to get out of there. But, I think that there's something that culturally, as more and more people pick these things up, that we're going to have to get used to, and what it means, in the same way we all got used to people sitting together at a dinner table looking at their phones. And so that's going to be really interesting to watch how it plays out. It's bigger than just a device. It's like socially how we're going to get it into our lives. That's really fascinating.
Most definitely. Well, thanks a lot for the great discussion. I want to thank our panelists, Andrew Lih at American University, Cindy Jeffers at Salon, Julia Beizer at the Washington Post, Ricardo Bilton at Digiday, and our producer, Jefferson Yen. And I want to thank our sponsor, NextSpace and NextKids. You can learn about their pioneering program at nextspace.us/NextKids. You can catch us each and every week on the Mediatwits at PBS MediaShift at mediashift.org each and every Friday. Thanks, everyone.